The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Copper Ridge as Sheriff Tom Bradley wiped the sweat from his weathered brow, his calloused hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and the weight of responsibility that had consumed his every waking moment for the past 6 months. The town that had once bustled with miners, ranchers, and merchants now resembled a ghost settlement, with boarded-up windows and empty hitching posts serving as silent testimony to the reign of terror that had gripped the entire territory like a strangling noose around the neck of civilization itself. For months, the Apache gang, led by the ruthless warrior known as Black Hawk, had terrorized every settlement within 100 miles, leaving behind a trail of blood, stolen gold, and broken dreams that seemed to stretch endlessly across the unforgiving desert landscape like a crimson river flowing through the heart of the American frontier. What made this band particularly dangerous wasn't just their skill in combat, but their leader's cunning intelligence and his ability to disappear into the desert like smoke in the wind, always staying one step ahead of the law and leaving frustrated posses to chase shadows through the burning sands while innocent people continued to die. Tom had been tracking them for 6 grueling months, following cold trails and false leads, watching good men die trying to bring these outlaws to justice, each failure weighing heavier on his conscience than the last, each sleepless night filled with the faces of victims he had been unable to save. The territorial governor had grown desperate, posting a reward so substantial that bounty hunters from as far as California had come seeking their fortune. But even the most experienced manhunters had returned empty-handed, or hadn't returned at all, their bones bleaching white in the desert sun, alongside those of countless other would-be heroes. But it wasn't just gold that awaited the man brave enough to capture Black Hawk and his gang. The governor had also promised the victor his choice of bride from among the most beautiful unmarried women in the territory, daughters of wealthy ranchers and prominent businessmen who had suffered losses at the hands of these raiders. A promise that had attracted even more attention to the already substantial bounty. The very idea seemed almost medieval in its conception, like something from the old country rather than the modern American frontier. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and the governor was willing to try anything to restore peace to his troubled territory. Hey there, friend! Before we continue with Tom's incredible story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying this tale of the Old West. And tell me, what city are you watching from today? I always love hearing from our viewers around the world. Now, let's get back to our story and see how Tom's determination would change not just his own life, but the entire course of Arizona Territory's history. Tom Bradley wasn't like other lawmen. He was a former cavalry scout who understood Apache tactics better than most white men alive, having spent 5 years learning their ways during the Apache Wars that had raged across the Southwest like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. He had learned their language during his years serving at Fort Apache, and more importantly, he had earned the respect of several peaceful Apache chiefs who despised Black Hawk's violent methods and saw him as a disgrace to their people, a renegade who brought shame upon all Apache warriors with his senseless brutality. It was this unique knowledge that would prove to be his greatest weapon in the hunt that was about to unfold. Though Tom had no idea just how much his life was about to change, or how his decision in the coming weeks would echo through the generations like thunder rolling across the desert mountains. His understanding of Apache culture went deeper than mere tactical knowledge. He had lived among them, shared their food, learned their stories, and understood the complex honor code that governed their society. Knowledge that most white men dismissed as savage superstition, but which Tom recognized as a sophisticated system of beliefs and values. This cultural understanding had saved his life more than once during his cavalry days, and he suspected it would be crucial in the confrontation that was rapidly approaching like a summer storm building on the horizon. The breakthrough came on a sweltering Tuesday morning when Tom received word from his Apache contact, an old chief named Standing Bear, that Black Hawk's band was planning to hit the silver shipment from the Tombstone Mines, the largest and most valuable convoy to travel through the territory in over a year. Standing Bear had risked his own life to bring this information, riding through the night to reach Copper Ridge before dawn. His weathered face, grave with the knowledge of what was to come, and the understanding that he was betraying members of his own people, even if they were renegades who had abandoned the old ways. The convoy would be traveling through Devil's Canyon, a narrow passage between towering red rocks that provided perfect cover for an ambush. A place where many good men had already met their end, and where the bones of previous victims lay scattered among the stones, like grim reminders of the canyon's deadly reputation. The canyon had earned its name honestly. It was a natural killing ground, where the slightest mistake meant death, where the echoing walls could turn a single gunshot into a thunderous roar that confused and disoriented anyone caught within its confines. Tom knew this was his chance, perhaps his only chance, to end the reign of terror that had gripped the territory and restore some semblance of peace to the land he had sworn to protect, even if it meant risking his own life and the lives of his men in the process. He spent 3 days carefully planning his strategy, studying maps until his eyes burned from the strain, consulting with military tacticians at Fort Huachuca, and positioning his men at strategic points throughout the canyon, knowing that one mistake would mean death for them all, and would likely ensure that Black Hawk's reign of terror would continue indefinitely. Unlike previous attempts to capture the gang, which had relied on brute force and superior numbers, Tom decided to use their own tactics against them, employing the very strategies he had learned during his years fighting alongside Apache scouts in the cavalry, turning their greatest strengths into weaknesses through careful planning and superior positioning. He would let them take the bait, allow them to believe they had succeeded in their ambush, and then spring his own trap when they were least expecting it, turning their moment of triumph into their downfall with the precision of a master chess player making his final, decisive move. The plan required perfect timing and nerves of steel, but Tom had both in abundance, forged through years of surviving in the harshest conditions the frontier could offer, tempered by countless life-or-death situations that had taught him to remain calm under pressure. He selected only his most trusted deputies for the operation. Jake Morrison, a crack shot with a Winchester rifle who could put a bullet through a silver dollar at 200 yards and whose steady hand had never failed him in a crisis. Miguel Santos, a former vaquero who could track a ghost across solid rock and had never lost a trail in his life, whose knowledge of the desert was matched only by his loyalty to Tom. And old Pete Williams, a grizzled veteran who had survived more gunfights than any man had a right to, and whose steady hand and quick thinking had saved Tom's life on more than one occasion. Each man understood the risks involved, knew that they might not survive the coming confrontation, But they also understood that someone had to take a stand against the chaos that was consuming their territory. Someone had to draw a line in the sand and say that enough was enough. As dawn broke over Devil's Canyon on the appointed day, Tom and his men took their positions among the rocks, their hearts pounding with anticipation and the weight of responsibility that rested on their shoulders, knowing that the fate of the entire territory might well depend on the events of the next few hours, and that failure would mean not just their own deaths, but the continuation of a reign of terror that had already claimed too many innocent lives. The silver convoy appeared right on schedule. 6 heavily loaded wagons escorted by a dozen armed guards, their wheels creaking ominously in the morning stillness as they wound their way through the treacherous canyon pass like a slow-moving target presenting itself to hidden predators. Tom watched through his spyglass as the wagons entered the narrow passage, noting the nervous behavior of the horses, who seemed to sense the danger that lurked in the rocks above. Their ears pricked forward and their eyes rolling white with fear. The guards were alert, but not overly concerned. They had made this run dozens of times before without incident, and the presence of so many armed men should have been enough to deter most would-be robbers. But they had no idea that they were walking into a trap that had been months in the planning. Tom could see the tension in their postures, the way their hands rested on their weapons, but he also saw the false confidence that came from routine, the dangerous assumption that today would be like any other day, an assumption that was about to prove tragically wrong. Somewhere in the rocks above, Black Hawk and his warriors were also watching, preparing to strike like the predators they had become, their painted faces hidden behind stone and shadow as they waited for the perfect moment to unleash death upon the unsuspecting convoy below. The morning air was thick with tension, and Tom could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool desert morning, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of his rifle as he waited for the inevitable attack that would determine the fate of everyone in the canyon. He had positioned his men with military precision, each one covering a specific field of fire, each one understanding his role in the complex plan that was about to unfold. But even the best plans could go wrong in the chaos of battle, and Tom knew that luck would play as much of a role as skill in the coming confrontation. The attack came with the sudden violence of a thunderstorm. Apache war cries echoing off the canyon walls as arrows and bullets rained down on the convoy from multiple directions, the sound of gunfire reverberating through the narrow passage like thunder rolling across the mountains. The guards fought bravely, returning fire as best they could while trying to protect the precious cargo, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by an enemy that seemed to materialize from the very stones themselves, appearing and disappearing like ghosts in the morning shadows. Tom forced himself to wait, watching good men fall, knowing that revealing his position too early would doom them all to the same fate that had befallen so many others who had tried to stop Black Hawk. His jaw clenched tight as he watched the slaughter unfold below. It was the longest 10 minutes of his life, each second stretching into eternity as he watched the battle unfold below. The screams of wounded men and horses mixing with the crack of rifle fire and the whistle of arrows to create a symphony of violence that would haunt his dreams for years to come. But finally, the moment came when Black Hawk and his warriors descended from their hiding places to claim their prize. Confident in their victory and eager to examine the wealth they had just stolen, their guard down for the first time since the attack began. That's when Tom gave the signal. a sharp whistle that cut through the noise of battle like a knife, and his carefully positioned men opened fire from multiple directions, catching the Apache gang in a crossfire they couldn't escape, turning the hunters into the hunted in the span of a heartbeat. The battle that followed was fierce and bloody, lasting nearly an hour as it raged through the canyon, with gunfire echoing off the rock walls and creating a deafening cacophony that could be heard for miles across the desert, a sound that would bring curious onlookers and scavengers from every direction once the shooting stopped. Black Hawk proved to be every bit as dangerous as his reputation suggested, fighting with the desperation of a cornered wolf, his rifle spitting fire as he tried to rally his men and find a way out of the trap that had been so carefully laid for him by an enemy who understood his tactics better than he had ever imagined possible. The Apache leader was a formidable opponent, moving through the rocks with the fluid grace of a natural predator. His war paint streaked with sweat and blood as he fought for his life and the lives of his remaining followers. Tom found himself engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with Black Hawk, each man trying to outmaneuver the other among the labyrinthine passages of the canyon, their rifles speaking in deadly conversation as they sought the perfect shot that would end the confrontation once and for all. The other members of the gang fought with equal ferocity, knowing that capture meant certain death at the end of a rope, their desperation making them even more dangerous as they sought to break free from the carefully constructed trap that was slowly closing around them like the jaws of some massive predator. But Tom's superior planning and the element of surprise eventually won the day, his men's disciplined fire gradually wearing down the gang's resistance, as one by one the outlaws fell to well-placed shots from hidden positions. When the smoke finally cleared and the last echoes of gunfire faded away into the desert silence, 7 members of the gang lay dead among the rocks, their blood seeping into the thirsty sand, and Black Hawk himself was wounded and captured, along with the 3 surviving members of his band who had thrown down their weapons in surrender when they realized that further resistance was futile. The territorial governor's reward was finally within Tom's grasp. But the real test of his character was yet to come, and he had no idea that his greatest challenge lay not in the desert, but in the civilized halls of the territorial capital, where a different kind of battle awaited him. News of Tom's victory spread across the territory like wildfire, carried by telegraph wires and newspaper headlines that proclaimed him a hero from one end of Arizona to the other, his name becoming synonymous with justice and courage in a land where both were often in short supply. Within a week, he found himself standing in the governor's mansion in Tucson, surrounded by territorial officials, newspaper reporters, and curious onlookers who had come to see the man who had accomplished what many thought impossible. Their faces filled with a mixture of admiration and curiosity as they studied the quiet sheriff who had brought down the most feared outlaw in the Southwest. The mansion itself was a testament to the wealth and power that had been built on the backs of miners and ranchers, with imported furniture from back east, crystal chandeliers that sparkled like captured starlight, and oil paintings that seemed wildly out of place in the harsh desert territory, creating an atmosphere of refined civilization that felt almost alien to a man who had spent his life on the frontier. Governor Harrison, a portly man with an impressive mustache and a politician's smile that never quite reached his eyes, made a great show of presenting Tom with a chest containing $10,000 in gold coins. More money than the sheriff had ever seen in one place, enough to buy a ranch and live comfortably for the rest of his life, enough to ensure that he would never again have to worry about where his next meal was coming from. The gold gleamed in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the mansion's tall windows, each coin representing more wealth than most frontier families saw in a lifetime. But Tom found himself strangely unmoved by the display of riches, his mind already turning to the second part of the reward that awaited him. But it was the second part of the reward that drew the most attention from the assembled crowd. And Tom could feel the eyes of every person in the room upon him as the governor prepared to fulfill the second part of his promise, a promise that had seemed almost fantastical when first announced, but which was now about to become reality. The governor had kept his word, gathering together 12 of the territory's most eligible young women, daughters of wealthy families who had agreed to participate in this unusual arrangement. Though Tom could see the nervousness and uncertainty in their eyes as they stood before the assembled crowd like prize cattle at a county fair. They stood in a line like contestants in some bizarre competition, each one beautiful in her own way, dressed in their finest gowns and trying to maintain their dignity despite the awkward circumstances that had brought them to this moment. Their faces carefully composed masks that hid their true feelings about being offered as prizes to a man they had never met. There was Margaret Sinclair, the banker's daughter with golden hair that caught the light like spun silk, and emerald eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Her porcelain skin unmarked by the harsh desert sun, and her delicate hands soft from a life of privilege and comfort. Rebecca Martinez, whose father owned the largest ranch in the territory, and whose beauty was matched only by her reputation for intelligence and her skill at managing the complex business affairs of a cattle empire. Sarah Thompson, whose beauty was legendary throughout Arizona, and who had turned down more marriage proposals than any woman in the territory, her raven black hair and violet eyes making her the subject of countless poems and songs, and 9 others, each representing the cream of territorial society, women who had been raised in comfort and luxury and who had never known the harsh realities of frontier life that had shaped Tom's character and worldview. The crowd murmured with anticipation as Governor Harrison explained that Tom could choose any one of these women to be his bride, and that her family would provide a substantial dowry to ensure their future prosperity, making him not just a hero, but a wealthy man as well, a man who could take his place among the territorial elite and enjoy all the privileges that came with such status. Tom studied each woman carefully, noting their obvious beauty and refinement, their expensive gowns and carefully arranged hair, the way they held themselves with the practiced grace of women who had been trained from birth to be ornaments in a man's world. But his eyes kept returning to one figure who stood slightly apart from the others, as if she didn't quite belong in this lineup of territorial aristocracy. At the end of the line was Elena Vasquez, a woman whose generous curves and warm brown eyes seemed to radiate a different kind of beauty than the others, a beauty that came from within, rather than from careful grooming and expensive clothes, a beauty that spoke of strength and character rather than mere physical perfection. While the other women appeared nervous and uncertain, their eyes darting between Tom and the crowd like frightened deer caught in an open meadow, Elena stood with quiet confidence, her head held high despite the whispers and stares of the crowd. and Tom could see something in her expression that the others lacked, a strength and resilience that reminded him of the frontier women who had helped build this territory with their own hands. Women who could birth a baby in the morning and defend their homestead from raiders in the afternoon. Elena's dress was simpler than the others, made of good quality fabric, but lacking the elaborate decorations and expensive lace that adorned the gowns of her companions. Yet somehow she managed to look more elegant than any of them, her natural grace and dignity shining through despite her more modest circumstances. Tom found himself drawn to the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she seemed to be studying him as carefully as he was studying her, as if she were trying to take the measure of his character, rather than simply hoping to be chosen for her beauty. There was something in her bearing that suggested she had faced hardship and emerged stronger, something that told him she would be a partner, rather than merely a decoration, a woman who could stand beside him through whatever challenges life might bring, rather than someone who would need to be protected and sheltered from the harsh realities of frontier existence. The moment of decision had arrived, and the entire room fell silent as Tom stepped forward to make his choice, the weight of every eye in the room pressing down upon him like a physical force, the tension so thick it could almost be cut with a knife. The crowd expected him to select one of the more conventionally beautiful women, perhaps Margaret, with her striking features and family wealth, or Sarah, with her reputation as the territory's most sought-after belle, women who would bring him social status and connections in addition to beauty, women who would make him the envy of every man in the territory. Instead, Tom walked directly to Elena, his boots echoing on the polished marble floor like gunshots in the sudden silence, took her hand gently in his calloused fingers, and announced to the stunned assembly, "I choose this one," his voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence that followed his unexpected decision. The room erupted in surprised murmurs and confused whispers, with some of the assembled dignitaries looking shocked and others appearing almost offended by his choice, their faces reflecting a mixture of disbelief and disapproval that such a celebrated hero would make such an apparently foolish decision. The other women in the lineup showed various reactions. Some appeared relieved to be spared from an unwanted marriage. Others looked genuinely hurt or insulted that they had been passed over for someone they clearly considered beneath their social station. But Tom paid them no attention, his eyes focused entirely on Elena's face and the mixture of surprise and gratitude he saw there. He had made his choice based on something the others couldn't see. The wisdom in Elena's eyes that spoke of a woman who had faced hardship and emerged stronger. The strength in her bearing that suggested she could handle whatever challenges life might throw at her. And the kindness he sensed in her heart that reminded him of his own mother, who had raised him alone on a hardscrabble farm after his father died in the Civil War, teaching him the values of hard work, honesty, and compassion that had guided him throughout his life. Later, when a persistent reporter cornered him outside the mansion and asked him why he had chosen Elena over the others, demanding an explanation for what seemed to many like an act of madness, Tom's answer became legendary throughout the West and was reprinted in newspapers from California to Texas, quoted in saloons and parlors alike as an example of frontier wisdom. A man heading into the harsh frontier needs a woman who can survive the lean times as well as the good ones. Elena has the strength and character to build a life with, not just a pretty face to admire. Beauty fades, but character lasts forever, and I'd rather have a woman who can stand beside me through whatever storms may come than one who'll wilt at the first sign of hardship." His words proved prophetic in ways he couldn't have imagined, as Elena became not only his devoted wife, but also his partner in every sense of the word. A woman who could shoot as straight as any man when raiders threatened their property, cook a meal over an open fire that would make a restaurant chef weep with envy, and deliver a baby in the middle of a blizzard with hands as steady as a surgeon's. Her strength and competence becoming legendary throughout the territory. She helped him establish a successful ranch outside of Tucson, using the reward money to buy land and cattle. Her business acumen and practical wisdom proving invaluable as they built their empire from nothing but determination and hard work. Elena's knowledge of ranching, gained from growing up on her father's small spread, complemented Tom's law enforcement experience perfectly, and together they created something that would last for generations, a legacy built on mutual respect and shared values rather than mere physical attraction. She bore him 4 strong children, 2 sons who grew up to be respected lawmen like their father, carrying on the family tradition of service and justice, and 2 daughters who inherited their mother's strength and wisdom, becoming influential women in their own right, who helped shape the development of Arizona territory as it grew from a wild frontier into a civilized state. Elena stood by his side through droughts that killed half their cattle, her resourcefulness and determination helping them survive when other ranchers gave up and moved back east. Through Indian raids that threatened their very lives, her courage under fire earning the respect of even the most hardened frontiersmen. And through all the challenges that frontier life could throw at them, never once complaining or asking for an easier life, never once making Tom regret his choice or wonder what might have been if he had chosen differently. Years later, when Tom had become one of the most respected ranchers in Arizona, and their children had children of their own, people would still talk about the day he chose the obese one and found true happiness in a decision that seemed foolish to everyone else, but proved to be the wisest choice of his life. A choice that had brought him not just personal fulfillment, but had helped build one of the most successful and respected families in the territory. Elena's love, loyalty, and inner strength had given him something far more valuable than conventional beauty, a partnership that lasted until the end of their days and became a testament to the power of looking beyond surface appearances to find the true treasures that life has to offer. Treasures that cannot be measured in gold or social status, but only in the depth of character and the strength of the human spirit. Their ranch became a gathering place for travelers and neighbors, known throughout the territory for Elena's hospitality and Tom's fair dealing. A place where justice was always served alongside the finest meals in Arizona, where disputes were settled fairly, and where those in need always found help and shelter. Their love story became the stuff of legend, proving that sometimes the greatest rewards come not from following the crowd, but from following your heart, and that true wisdom lies not in choosing what others expect, but in recognizing real value when you see it, even when it comes in an unexpected package that others might overlook or dismiss.